Right. Cameron, should we get started?
Sounds great. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you both for being here today, and to whoever is going to be listening in. I want to thank you again for coming. So today we're going to be meeting the mentor, Cameron, and we're going to be talking about how to stay creatively inspired, grow, and prosper as an artist, even with time and money life constraints. So before I get too far and introduce Cameron, I will mention that we do have our mentorship group for emerging artists that's going to be starting at this exact time next week on Tuesday, September the 12th. So if you are interested in joining us with that, more details will be available at the end for how to register. So with great honor, I'm going to introduce to you Cameron Schmitz. So she is a professional fine art painter based in the US in New England. She received her Master's of Fine Arts in Painting from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Painting and Drawing from the University of New Hampshire, in addition to completing studios at Studio Art Center International in Florence, Italy. Cameron teaches painting workshops that range from exploring abstraction, creative mark making, abstracting the landscape, and painting techniques for both representational and abstract painters. Formerly also in the commercial art gallery business, Cameron's breadth and depth of professional art experience provides her an expansive understanding of both art and the business of being an artist. Cameron's work has been featured at institutions that include Kyoto Sika University, Emory University, Northern Arizona University Art Museum, Green Mountain College, and the Fitchburg Art Museum. Her paintings are included in permanent collections that include New York Presbyterian Hospitals, UVM Medical Center, Lee Medical Centers, Wells Fargo, and the Al Musa Specialist Hospital in Saudi Arabia. Notable press includes spotlight features in Fresh Paint magazine and a featured guest on a two-part series of the popular podcast, Savvy Painter. Her work is sold and represented by galleries and art consultants that include Mitchell Giddings Fine Art, Terry Coleman Fine Art, Boston Art Inc., Art Partnership Inc., and Libby Sylvia Fine Art Consulting. Last but not least, Cameron is a mom to twin 7-year-old boys, a 9-year-old daughter, a stepmom to 16 and 20-year-old daughters, and a dog mom to her family's 9-month-old puppy. She understands the demands that are required to be a successful practicing artist while balancing with the demands of parenting and caretaking, all of life's other responsibilities, while making a livable income to support oneself, whether by selling your art or not. So I'm going to turn it over to Cameron to share a little bit of her artist story.
Thanks, Megan. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to see faces on here. I'm looking forward to talking to you and fielding any questions that you may have. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is how we each can use our own life's challenges as a starting point for ways to grow and develop as artists. And I've come to the point where I believe that actually what presents itself to us as challenges or difficulties are actually the very place where we should be leaning into to grow and develop as artists. And so I have found in my own reflections of my own art practice that the most pivotal moments in my own career have been the result of encountering challenges in my own life. And what may have seemed initially as a disadvantage or a hardship, which, let's be honest, as artists, there are plenty of directions that we can all be pulled into. And I find that the greatest difficulty as an artist is to protect one's art making practice and career, something that we have to be vigilant about, or it can quickly be taken away from us, or that's how it feels. So when I took a kind of more traditional route, in terms of becoming a practicing artist. I studied fine arts as an undergrad and went to grad school and kind of set on my path as saying, this is what I want to do. And then it wasn't until I had my first child, which I was prepared to be a mother. And it drastically changed my practice. So I reflect on this experience of, prior to having my first child, I was painting landscapes. I was going out on site. I was taking photographs and painting landscapes from photo reference or from observation. And suddenly, with having a newborn baby, the concept of going off and driving for inspiration was like completely unrealistic. And I remember going back into my studio and looking at works that were in progress and unfinished, months before when I had my daughter, and not feeling inspired, not feeling engaged by the work, not being excited, and having a little bit of a panic, thinking, how am I supposed to go out and collect inspiration? Like, I know my work is about to change because now I'm a mother, but how is that going to happen when I actually don't have any time to explore anything new? And so the interesting path that happened next was me saying to myself, you know what? Like, if I only have 30 minutes or 45 minutes in my studio, I'm just going to start by doing something that brings me joy and not trying to make things, because up until that point, I had always sold my work. And so the concept of actually making something just for fun versus selling in some ways became like an unfamiliar concept. And so I just suddenly started mixing beautiful colors on my palette and gave myself permission to play and not paint anything. And then all of a sudden, with mixing these juicy, saturated colors, which were actually less naturalistic than I would find in my natural environment when observing, when I was just kind of like isolated in my own studio without anything to look at, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, these colors that I was compelled to paint, grabbed a blank canvas and just started making marks on the surface, and felt a state of terror because I had always painted representationally. So painting abstract intuitively was very out in left field for me. It was not something that I felt comfortable with. And so I felt really uncomfortable thinking to myself, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I've never painted before. How can this be happening? My ego started creeping in, thinking, oh gosh, like, you should know what you're doing. You have a master's in fine arts. You should have this all figured out. And it was this wonderful moment of epiphany of realizing, like, as artists, we should actually be seeking out ways to feel like we're a child again and learning art for the very first time and don't know what we're doing. And as a result of putting myself in that place of just making marks on the surface and starting to paint intuitively and not with the intention of painting something or having no idea what I was painting, I felt really uncomfortable and I felt incredibly engaged in a way that I hadn't felt in a really long time. I felt like so excited and enthralled because all of a sudden there was all this mystery before me and this journey for me to head into. And so as we all kind of collect our own life experiences as we go, I found in my own experience as an artist that we all encounter hardships. I feel like time is one of those biggest things for all of us, in terms of very few of us have ample time to create. And so it's figuring out how to carve out time in our day, and then how to figure out how to use our time effectively to be able to do, like, well, I was going to say all the hundreds of tasks that an artist is required to do. As artists, as successful artists, we're required to wear many different hats, right? So there's the artist creator, there's the photographer who has to photograph your art, there's editing images and maintaining a website and having an online presence, being a writer, writing newsletters. All of these tasks, whether it's framing your art and finishing it, all of these tasks are required of being a contemporary modern day artist, right? And so more and more artists today are taking over additional tasks than I'd say, an artist 100 years ago, where their gallery dealer just handled everything, right? More and more artists are having to take more on. And so I think such an essential part of being a successful artist and a happy artist is figuring out how to use our time, how to use our current challenges as starting points for what direction to move into. Like something that may feel hard or difficult or uncomfortable, that's essentially your roadmap to kind of propel forward with, in terms of utilizing as a kind of starting point. So I'm interested in how how I can help as a mentor, help each person kind of identify what their own challenges are, and then using those to actually utilize as a strength in terms of leaning into to develop themselves as artists. And then also going back to using our time, thinking about like, how do I set aside time in my own practice to do something that's just for fun? How do you stay inspired? How do you feel? How do we kind of get back to that place of not knowing and feeling excited and enthralled and engaged, while still being serious about our work and taking it seriously? And how do we honor all the things that are going on in our life while still honoring art practice? And how do we invite things into our lives in order to help us become more confident and trusting ourselves, right? And so a big part of that, the story of having my daughter for the first time and painting intuitively, really what was happening is I was learning how to paint all over again. And I was learning to trust myself. Up until that point, I thought that my creativity lied in my skills as an observer. And those are important, but so much of what is like what fuels us and what feeds us and what brings us to the next phase is like finding the confidence and support to just let it rip and go and take risks. And in some ways, like strategically set those things up for us if they're not already presenting themselves to us. So I'll circle back on some of those topics that I've already touched upon as we kind of transition to that point.
Thanks for sharing your story, Cameron. I love hearing your story and that trigger point for you. And I guess I'm curious. So once you began painting more intuitively and in a completely new and different way, how did you lean into that and really just trust your instinct instead of going back to the way you painted before?
So I think because even though I felt terrified, thinking I don't know what I'm doing, and learning how to paint all over again, I think the joy and excitement and feeling so enthralled with something was my ticket. Like that was my realization that this is where I need to be. And it's not to say that I didn't go back to doing what I was doing before. Like the landscape remains to be a source of inspiration for me. And I did go back to painting landscapes, but suddenly my landscapes were more lyrical, more expressive, more colorful, like more full of life, because I was all of a sudden re-entering painting with an increased awareness. And so I think in many ways, it's impossible to go once your awareness is increased, like you can't go back exactly, right? You can return back to the same subject matter, but it's going to be expressed in a different way because we're different people at that point. And so what was interesting to me is that when I started painting abstractly, when I returned back to representational painting, my painting was so much better in my own opinion, because I was taking parts of abstract painting in terms of letting paint be paint, letting a brushstroke be a brushstroke. Like when I love painting, it's like, you know, I could look at a John Singer Sargent painting from far away and I'm like, and then I get up close and I'm like, holy smokes, like what looks like this incredibly detailed part on a sleeve is a single brushstroke. Like those are the moments in painting that get me excited. Like, oh my God, like where you're just enthralled. And I think that by me kind of re-entering painting and with a different approach, it allowed me suddenly to like bring back parts of the painting that excite me, which are seeing the stroke of an artist's hand, seeing color, seeing how two colors mix, and allowing the imperfections of art to be more present as a kind of form of a kind of just more kind of visceral expression in my work. That's a that's a long version.
So what are some of the other pivotal moments in your art journey that stand out for you?
I would say certainly, you know, when I went to graduate school and having the opportunity to delve into my work, any time where I've moved, where I've had to move studios or have been in transitions, doing artist residencies, those kinds of opportunities to be able to have uninterrupted time to delve into my work have been hugely impactful for me. And then recently, renovating my studio a couple of years ago, you know, to be able to have more space and kind of build upon systems within my own studio space to like, I just feel like I'm like all of us are slowly dialing it in terms of our studio spaces. And it's a matter of kind of figuring out what you need in that moment of time. And sometimes I've found that, anyways, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I would say that like any times of physical transition where I've had to move my body, like move houses or move studios, those things in some ways are disruptive, but they've also been hugely positively impactful.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm.
So, different question. So being an artist and a parent, and just being an adult in general, it's busy. So I'm wondering, what are some of the creative things that you do when you're extremely limited on time and might only have 5 to 10 minutes? What are some of the ways that you're filling that creatively?
Yeah, great question. So a few things. One of the things that I find to be most beneficial is if I don't have that much time to, like if I only have say 15 minutes, I don't want to set myself up of starting something new and then having to be pulled away and feeling that frustration of like, oh, look. And so I found that not having enough time to work can be really beneficial to just look at my work. And so that's one of those things where I think it's underrated how important it is just to sit and look at our work and have time. And so often, sometimes I'll pop into my studio and just look at pieces and then jot a couple notes down like, oh, I want to change this. Because I find that when back to when I had my first child, because I didn't have time in my studio, I would walk, my studio was in my house at the time, and I would have the baby carrier and walk into my studio. And it actually was amazing for me because prior I had had all these extended hours in my studio where I would overwork paintings. I'd beat them to death. I would say, oh, I should have stopped before. And then all of a sudden I didn't have that opportunity to overwork paintings. And I had to leave so often that it was a lot of leaving and coming back, and kind of coming in and just kind of spying on my paintings and peeking at them. And I was able to identify parts in my paintings that needed to be changed or modified so much faster because I had this equivalent of like we have to kind of turn things away and have a fresh perspective to see what, we kind of stop being able to see what we're looking at. We need visual breaks. And so it was kind of this like forced thing that made me realize, oh, like this is frustrating that I can't paint, but actually this is being advantageous to me right now. So when I come into the studio, I know exactly what I need to do. Like I was kind of like, I think having in a short periods of time just to look at your work and see what's happening, and then to make little notes so that when you do have more time to work, you're already rolling. You already know what you're supposed to do, versus coming into the studio and saying, what was I doing? Where did I end up? And then the other thing, sometimes if I only have a short period of time, it's like, having that moment, it's like, what can I do to just kind of like, whether it's prep, going into my studio, taping papers down, like prepping supports so that when I do have more time, it's all ready to go. Like I'm always thinking about ways to kind of set myself up for success so that when I do have the opportunity to work, I can just jump in without any sort of obstacles getting in my way. And sometimes that might be visual inspiration, right? So kind of hopping onto Pinterest and looking at my Pinterest boards and kind of, or picking up an art book or picking up a book of poetry, like having that moment where it's kind of like this opportunity to feed yourself in a way that like is more about kind of filling up and preparation before you're producing.
Yeah, the reflection and being really deliberate with what you're doing when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And feeling that creativity too.
Yeah.
So what is something that you do to fuel your creativity and stay inspired and keep that joy sparked?
Yeah. So for me, and I know this is different for other people, I would say the biggest thing is working, right? So I have found that the more that I paint, the more that I create, the more that I draw, the more creative and inspired I actually feel. And I get into a rhythm, and that is truly what inspires me. The more work I make, the more ideas that come to me. Things just kind of flow out without any sort of effort. But in addition to that, like I think it's really important to reserve times to go on art field trips. So I'll visit art galleries and museums. I'll treat myself to an art book. Like all these things help to, in some ways, I think, praise the practice of being an artist, and like these little gifts that we can give ourselves that I feel like become really inspirational. So for all of us, and part of that for me might be taking a walk in the woods in nature and just like listening and breathing and being quiet and paying attention, slowing down, like all those things. But I would say the biggest one is actually making work itself, which is kind of funny.
Totally true.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over, like I mentioned before, Cameron's mentorship group is going to start next week on the 12th. And we're going to go over some of the topics and themes that Cameron's going to be diving into. Did you want to just chat about it, Cameron, or do you want me to pop it up on the screen? Or
yeah, no, I can. I mean, I've touched upon some of the things. So, so in our mentorship group, so much of it is driven by you and things that, that it's your opportunity to say, this is where I'm at. This is what I want to learn about. This is what I want to know more about. But like in terms of things that I would love to cover and to support you all with would be, covering studio space, how to enhance your studio space so it's a place of inspiration and production, right? How can we, sometimes that might be decluttering your studio and taking everything off the walls and having a blank slate. Sometimes it might be pinning things up on your walls and having visual inspiration, like really being thoughtful about our studio space. And then simultaneously in terms of how to how to kind of enhance our in-studio space is how to organize our materials to increase our productivity and creative flow. So like the easier that we can make things for us in terms of starting, I think the faster we're able to find our creative flow, and the easier we can find our materials and look for things. It's also like when we can be really effective in that way, we can also maximize our profit margins when we're actually looking, we're spending money on supplies and selling our work. If one is trying to increase their profit margins as a business, a lot of that has to do with studio management and materials management. As I touched on before, how to effectively budget your time to be able to wear all the multiple hats that an artist is required to wear. So, this involves not only creating the art, but also visually and digitally documenting and photographing your art, editing your images, maintaining websites and online presence, finishing and framing, marketing, managing a physical and a digital inventory of your work. All of these things, like we need to have time to manage these things, and inventory management means making titles, writing everything down, the sizes, how many do I have of these? What does it look like if I don't have a title yet? Creating an ID number for that thing so that you can track it, because we can't keep all of this stuff in our head. Ways to grow as a creative artist while also growing as a business. So not letting one thing take over the other, right? Or it's okay to do that, but do it in cycles. So there might be times where you're just like make. And then there might be another, like part of the cycle is, okay, now I need to finish these and get these out into the world. How to effectively apply and submit work to commercial art galleries and art exhibition opportunities. Ways to feed and fuel your creativity and stay inspired. How to carve out time to manage your time so that your art making practice is protected and honored, even in spite of all the constraints that we may face. How to prepare, create, and launch a body of work or a new collection. So we'll be covering kind of that process and doing it while we discuss it. Breaking out of perfectionism to discover looser, more expressive mark making and brushwork. I think that's something that in some ways, not in some ways, but I'll say a lot of that is just a matter of little exercises that we can do and warm-ups in our own studio to be able to be warmed up and loose and free, so the work that we're making doesn't feel like it's being stifled, but that we can just let it flow. How to honor your art in your own life in order to better support your art making practice. And as I mentioned as well, how to find ways to still have fun. I'm the kind of person that errs on the side of being way too serious about everything. And I take everything really seriously. And so I'm the kind of person that actually needs to create and set up things for myself to do it just for fun and be playful and experimental. And so each one of us has our own kind of ways. And so all of these are a matter of kind of meeting you where you are at and helping you with all of these things.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I know that I'm really, really excited and thrilled to learn. Cameron, you have so much to offer. And I've already gained so much just sort of listening to you talk a few times, honestly, and not just, art life itself, but how do you integrate it into an everyday life as well, right? How do you integrate all these pieces and find that creativity and joy? So I'm really, really excited for our mentorship group to start. So again, that starts next week. Check it out. Check out Cameron's website too. She's got lots of really fantastic things on there. And if anybody has any questions or you want to chat about anything, the floor is kind of open up right now. So feel free to type in the chat box, or if you want, unmute yourself and just share something. But again, thanks for being here today.
Cameron, are you able to show us a couple pieces of your work, and what mediums do you work in? I find it super intriguing that you went from representational to abstraction and just that whole like how that disrupted your mind, because I'm going through that currently a bit with myself, going from very representational to maybe a little more whimsical and some abstract, and it's like making me kind of think, have I abandoned? Is this a good path to go down? Like, yeah, anyway, I'd love to hear more about all of that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is I have found, so I have examples of my work behind me. And I'll bring some of these to look closer, to bring closer to you, but I was just gonna like, I love what you said, because recently, about 2 years ago, I started, painting from like looking at flower bouquets and photographing flower bouquets, and my work up for like the past 9 years has primarily been intuitive-based abstraction. And I find that I think both of those things are valuable. Like as an artist who might be identified as an abstract artist, like I found that too often artists are having to be forced into being pigeonholed into these things. And I think of like it kind of causes artists to be self-conscious about what they're making, like, oh, as if it's disjointed. And I think about things as bodies of work, right? So I might have a series that's floral based, that's more representational, and it's a certain aesthetic, it's a certain feel. There's certain techniques that I employ with that type of work. And then with my more intuitive abstraction pieces, those are different. Now, those tend to be bigger and larger. There's different techniques that I'm employing there, right? And so, or sometimes I might just straight out be doing a landscape, and I might be using a palette knife, and I'm really thinking, I'm excited about shapes of color and observing what I'm seeing. So I think all of these things feed each other. And I see it infiltrate through my own work. So examples, like for instance, these pieces I've been working on simultaneously in my studio. So I'm an oil painter. I mean, that's my bread and butter of the work that I make. I use oil paints because I just love the color, but I think we also live in a time where we have access to so many great materials. And so all the things that I'm thinking about are not necessarily limited to oil painting, but this is an example of an oil painting where it's kind of teetering on both sides, right? So it's like when you look at it, you clearly see suggestion of the landscape in terms of this kind of receding background as things are appearing to be lighter in color, while simultaneously employing really fluid, expressive brushwork. So something like this might be more looking like a landscape, though in an abstract way. And then here's something where I'm painting simultaneously. You can see this maybe a little bit better when I get up close here. What started as an intuitive abstract painting. So I wasn't, either both of these, in those cases, I'm not looking from anything specifically in terms of observation, but intuitively allowing the composition to develop. But I'm interested in color and nuances, like the things that I'm interested in terms of my own painting, whether it be abstract or representational or somewhere in between. So here's something referring to my florals. So I'm using here a combination of, so this is on panel, I'm using more transparent colors where I'm wiping away, where the surface quality of the work is different from those that are on canvas. I'm using pigment sticks here to draw through into the work. So I'm interested in drawing, I'm interested in mark making. I have a background in printmaking as well. And so those things come through in my work. And so, but like that really what makes me tick is color. I'm interested in color relationships, and I get super excited about color and shape and kind of the formalities of art making. So this is so here on this side I have abstract oils on paper, and then these guys hanging in the wall are oils on wood, cradled wood panel. And then those that I showed you are on canvas. And so I'm using a combination, I'm painting on a combination of cradled wood panel, often arches, oil paper, both as is and gessoed, because when I gesso it, it creates a less absorbent surface where I can do a wiping away technique. But part of the reason I do love working with oils is because of what's available to me in terms of color transparency. So I love playing with just subtle color shifts and light. And I find that I can kind of really exploit what's available to me in terms of pigment and transparency when working with oils.
Well, I know, yeah, like you can get that with acrylic as well and work a lot faster. So
For sure.
how long would a sitting be, and how many sittings would you have with one particular painting to get what you want out of it?
That's a great question. So, and it depends. So, and what you're saying with acrylics, open acrylics and all the mediums available now allow the slow drying time, right? So it keeps things open for a longer period, so you can manipulate in the same way as oils. So, my working time for paintings can be anywhere from 3 months to 3 years for my paintings. Yeah. And so I have probably over like 70 works in progress right now. And so I have bodies of work that go in rotation. So I might start a bunch of paintings and then I'm like, I don't know where I go with these next. I'm just going to put these aside and work on something else. And so I work in the way where I have a lot of works in progress simultaneously, but a lot of them are just put to the side. And I find for me, my own process, I need time away from the work to be able to get to that next phase of looking at really seeing the painting for what it's doing and being really thoughtful as to what I'm doing. So when I teach painting, I always say that like the first 75% of the painting can be done in a single sitting. And that's the case for me. I paint really fast. The last 25% of the painting go really slowly, as they should be, because that's where you need to work with a restraint and really like get in and get out, like make a mark and get out of there and stand back away from the work and look at to see what, if we continue to work fast all the way to end, that's how we accidentally overwork a painting. And so I find that like I achieve most of my paintings like 75 to 85% in a single session, whether that be a 10 by 10 oil and panel or a 50 by 50 canvas, honestly. Like, and sometimes the smaller works take longer for me to finish than a larger piece. But it takes me unless it's a commission where I'm like, this is getting done within this period of time and I'm prioritizing those pieces to complete within a certain period of time. On average, I would say like the short 3 months is pretty typical of like, if I have a really direct path and I'm saying I'm starting these things, it's drawing, I'm gonna do another layer, go back into it, multiple sessions, varnish, wire, photograph, like, so 3 months I would say is my, like, it's hard to do anything less than that. And 3 years, I mean, I have ID numbers in the back of my canvases, which show me general time when I started it. And a lot of these things here have 2002 behind them.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so it's, I work fast and slow in different ways.
Do you have a checklist for yourself of this makes a good abstract? Because I think that can be so like confusing in our mind. How is it a good abstract?
Right. And the reality is like, so when you look at great art, whether it be an abstract painting or a representational painting, it's all kind of relies on the same things. That's what I love about teaching abstract painting is it's really the same as representational painting. But so much of it really is different for each person, right? So like for me, what makes a successful painting are paintings that can be viewed at multiple viewpoints and they bring you something different, right? So if I'm going to stand 25 feet away from a painting, I'm going to be like, oh, that composition the way, the movement, everything is like, feels really great. Then I get a little bit closer, right? Like 10, 15 feet. And I see something different. I notice other aspects of the artwork that, you know, enthrall me. And then I get up 5 inches or a foot away from the painting, and material wise, the surface quality of the painting excites me, right? So all of a sudden, I'm not looking at the composition anymore. I'm looking at mark making. I'm looking at how the artist manipulated the materials, how one color collides into another. And that's when you can see whether an artist has a sense of confidence in mastery over their work, right? Like someone could make what looks like a great painting far away, and then you get up close to it and you're like, you could be really disappointed because it's clumsy, it looks self-conscious, and the marks are tentative. And so a successful painting, whether it be representational or abstract, has to do with the kind of viewing experiences, both as the artist and viewer. And then also the drawing of a painting, right? I love color, but a painting is not gonna, no matter how awesome the color is, the painting is not gonna work if it doesn't work as a drawing, right? So as a kind of black and white, thinking a pure value scale. And so when thinking about works, like some of the most kind of successful, famous works of art by any artist of any time, if you turn that into a black and white image, it would be, it would still stand on its own without relying on color. And so, but for abstract painting in particular, if one is one is wanting to dive into that, you know, my advice is in terms of expressive brushwork, using more saturated color versus a natural, like if you want to heighten the abstraction into work, it's more about kind of pushing the elements within works, like kind of exaggerating shapes or making a really loose brushwork or becoming more minimalist in the work. All these things we have the opportunity to kind of play with to, if we want to expand upon abstraction while still making a painting just as seductive as a representational painting.
So do you have a starting place? Like, do you do sketches first, or you just take your blank canvas and start working at it, or maybe you do both?
I both. So if I'm working representationally and I say I'm working, for instance, like photo reference, that's where I kind of nail down my composition, my shapes, blocking things out. I'm working in a different way. I really know where I'm going. When I'm working more intuitively, I start by simply mixing up. It starts with a color palette. So mixing up values of color, different color mixtures, or just thinking about a color scheme in particular and just making marks on the surface and then responding to that and seeing what happens, right? And so both of those things I find, yeah, so I have different approaches to making work depending on where I'm going with it. But it's not to say those things don't switch up. So sometimes I might take what was a representational painting and just be like, this is not working, and just make marks over the surface and break it up, turn it upside down and turn it into an abstract painting. And often those are like, honestly, I say this all the time, the paintings that we think are, like for me at least, the paintings that I kind of at one point thought were failures, struggles, I kept like, those I put aside, and then another week, another day, another month, I pull that out, and it's like at the very least you have this wonderful underpainting to layer upon, and that's where the richness comes from, you know. So like one-shot paintings can be like, there's a value in a one-shot painting because they're loose, they're, you know, like there's a kind of work that's made when an artist is like, I have a limited amount of time. It's like, you have to be really deliberate and you just get it done, right? You can't fuss about the decisions. It's like, and then there's other paintings that say go on for extended periods of time where you have all these beautiful layers, both in terms of color and in texture, that add a kind of richness to the work that an artist in some ways like wouldn't have necessarily found as a straight and narrow path, right? They kind of had to go through, like, we have to sometimes go down these meandering paths to discover all these beautiful layers that we wouldn't have necessarily conceived of, right? A lot of I celebrate process and having kind of clear intentions, maybe about where, like, what your starting point is. Like, I'm going to make 5 paintings using this color scheme or using these photo references as a starting point, and then letting your work, like, at a certain point, say you're working from observation, putting the photo away and just letting your work lead you. So I would say, to answer your question, my approaches with my work, it's different based on whether I'm painting representationally, which would be planning out a composition, or working really intuitively and abstractly. And both of those things have advantages to them. But I allow, like, parts of the process to also, like, I'm flexible to let those things cross-pollinate in my studio.
I love that. And I love that you've, like, given space for both, because I think you're right that we get kind of told we have to choose one or the other, but we can just call it a body of work. And that can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it becomes really hard also when an artist is successful at something. Like, people are like, what are you doing? Like, I heard a lot of that myself. Like, people are like, why don't you just do what you were doing before? Because you were really good at it and people loved it. Like, what are you doing now? Right. It's like, really, as an artist, you have to continually put yourself in a place of vulnerability to be able to take risks, and be comfortable with uncertainty or not knowing where the work is going. Like, this is, and being okay with the fact that you might not just do one thing anymore, right? Like, we're changing as people. We're experiencing all these different things. Like, we're dynamic beings, and what we make is being impacted by what we're experiencing in life. To expect an artist to be doing the same thing all, like, over and over again, I feel like is just completely unrealistic, and then doesn't give artists space to be able to explore. So I love your way of, like, the way you articulate it in terms of making space for that. It's so important.
Thank you, Cameron. That was so insightful and inspiring.
Yay. So glad.
Now, if anybody has any other questions, we still have a little bit of time left. And for those that are wondering how to sign up for Cameron's mentorship group, I will be sharing my screen, and I'll show you exactly how you can find that registration link.
Great.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen. If anybody has any questions, feel free to cut me off now.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
No, go ahead first.
No, I was going to say, I find that sometimes questions come to me after the fact. So if any of you have any questions that you want to ask privately, feel free to message me, and I'm happy to answer those questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Cameron. So the best way to find it is just to go to the main Mastrius website, mastrius.com, which takes you to the landing page. Eventually, because my computer is slow. And then you want to scroll down a little bit, and there's a bunch of links for, how the mentorship works. There's a video for, learning about how it started. And then you get down to, no, I passed it. Yeah. Oh my gosh, mentorship. So choose your mentor. You click on that, and then it will load up all the different mentors that are offering mentorship groups through Mastrius. The quickest way to find Cameron's is to just type in her name, and then you'll click on it. And then you'll have some more details about Cameron herself. There's a link to her website. Again, I loved looking through her website. So if you're unsure whether, Cameron would be a good mentor for you, take a look at her website, take a look at her Instagram. I was really inspired after looking at both of those. And then at the bottom, just keep scrolling down, and this is where you would hit to join the mentorship group. So you would click add to cart, and it walks you through the process right away. And again, if anybody has any questions, the Mastrius website is really good at kind of walking you through it a little bit more step by step if you need. And so if there's any other questions, again, we can stay on, but if not, thank you so much for joining us. Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing, you know, that amazing little teaser for what's going to happen in your mentorship group. I know that I'm really looking forward to it.
Yay, awesome. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. I enjoyed it. Great job, Megan.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Amy.
Nice to meet you, Cameron.
Same here.
Bye.
Bye.